So I wanted to start off today with an assertion that I don't think is too controversial or bold, but maybe it will be to people who don't watch my content all the time. And that is, if losing weight was just about counting calories, if it was just simple math, then we'd all do it, right? Maybe we eat too many pies and cakes and sweets over the holidays, but come January 1st, we just reel it back in, we cut back, say, okay, I'm gonna be much more diligent about that. We get back to our normal weight and we're good to go. But I think for a lot of us who have struggled with this kind of thing, we all know it's not that easy. And especially when you start to look at things like Hashimoto's and low thyroid, we know that that stuff can really complicate things, and we know that weight loss is multifactorial. So today I wanted to go over the 3 keys to feeling and looking your best for life, which include choosing the right diet, choosing the right macros, and choosing the right time to eat. And these are the kinds of strategies that I use every single day in my practice with my patients so we can facilitate that elusive, long-term, and sustainable weight loss. And I always like to cover weight loss because I think it's a great goal. It helps people to feel better physically and emotionally. But if you like these kind of videos, don't forget to hit the thumbs up button. And if you're new here, make sure you subscribe to the channel and also ring the bell. That way you're notified when I post a new video every single Thursday morning. My name is Dr. Bodle, and I specialize in helping women with Hashimoto's and low thyroid to lose weight and improve their energy naturally. And when it comes to losing weight, we don't want to just lose weight. We want to make sure that we keep it off, keep it sustainable, and hopefully don't make it miserable for us in the meantime. But when we look at the landscape of diet and nutrition, there's a lot of conflicting information out there. And we've joked before about how one day eggs can be good, next day eggs are bad, and the next day they're good again. And you could probably apply that to anything in nutrition. But what that tells me is that there's going to be a fair amount of individuality behind what diet fits you best. And instead of providing you with a hard set of rules, we need to provide people with a framework that they can adapt and change depending on their needs. So let's start off with our first key, which is choosing the right diet. Now, when I talk about choosing the right diet, what I'm referring to is what is that food item, irregardless of the calories or macros that it contains. So are we eating an avocado? Are we having whole grain bread, rice, steak, apples, whatever it might be? What is that thing that we're about to put in our body? And the reason this is so important is because if we eat a food that doesn't agree with our physiology, it's going to cause an inflammatory reaction, and that can lead to things like weight gain and a whole host of other symptoms. Remember, there are no good or bad foods, but there are foods that will work better or worse for your body. And that's why I always think it's silly where maybe you eat tomatoes and you notice that your joints feel more sore and inflamed. So really it's no one else's right to tell you whether you should or shouldn't eat tomatoes or whether they're healthy or not. You notice that they don't react well with you, and therefore it may behoove you to avoid that food. In these cases, I like to think about our metabolism like a fire. We want to have a combination of small sticks, large logs, and once we build that flame, it should be consistent and sustainable for us. But inflammatory foods are kind of like throwing water on that fire. Yes, some foods are going to be a bucket of water and others will be a bathtub, but either way, having some sort of food that doesn't agree with your body is going to completely interrupt our metabolic function, and that is, again, irregardless of the amount of calories that it's providing to us. But even though I think it makes sense to most people that we should avoid those foods that can cause an inflammatory reaction in our own body, it doesn't provide us a very good roadmap for what we should actually choose to go out and eat. And so for that, I often recommend a progression or a spectrum of different approaches which hold to the similar philosophical belief. As a starting point, I think it's a great recommendation for most of us for a majority of the time to adopt a whole foods diet. That means avoiding processed foods with a huge long list of ingredients, avoiding added sugar, avoiding added seed and vegetable oils, and when possible, cooking at home. Remember, if you can't put your thumb over the ingredient list, or every second word is something that's really tough for you to pronounce, then it's probably something you shouldn't be putting in your body on a regular basis. But as I said, a whole foods diet is just a starting point. And for a lot of people who are dealing with chronic thyroid conditions, the worse their symptoms are and the longer that they have gone on, the more restrictive that we have to be with our diet. That way we can help to hit the reset button and break some of those inflammatory loops that are occurring in your body. The next step in our progression will be choosing a whole food diet that is also gluten and dairy free. Now, I'm not saying that everyone has an issue with gluten or dairy, but they are some of the most common food irritants and many people do struggle with digesting them. This means avoiding any gluten-containing grains like wheat, barley, and rye, and also any product from any milk from any animal I think is considered a dairy product, and those should be avoided as well. Couple of quick notes here for when you go gluten and dairy free, and the first one is when going gluten free, it's important to obey the spirit of the law, not just the letter of the law. And what I mean by that is many times people will be eating pizzas, cakes, cookies, and when they go gluten-free, now they're having gluten-free pizzas, gluten-free cookies, and gluten-free cakes. But those are still processed foods, and you're probably better off avoiding them as well. And the second note is, when going gluten and dairy-free, don't make it a half effort. I often talk to people who say, yeah, I'm gluten-free, but when I inquire further, I find out that they're having toast every few days, and on the weekends, they like to have 1 or 2 cheat meals. Give your body a fair shot, and remember the fire analogy. If you're always throwing water on the fire, then you're always having to restart and rebuild that fire. So if we don't really separate ourselves from these kinds of foods, it makes it very difficult for us to tell if it's being effective or not. Main thing here is if you're gonna do it, do it. Don't give it a half effort and then say, well, it didn't really work for me. Next stop on our dietary progression is a paleo style diet. Now, if you read different people, you're going to be told different things are included, but don't worry too much about the nuance. The main ways that a paleo style diet differs from a gluten-free and dairy-free whole foods diet is that you're going to now be removing all grains, not just the gluten-containing grains, and you'll also be avoiding things like soy, corn, and legumes. And what you're hopefully noticing here is as we continue to move down the line, we're simply removing more and more foods that are likely to cause a reaction. Again, not all of these foods will, but if we're continuing to struggle with where we're at, then it makes sense that we need to be a little bit more cautious about the foods that we're eating. Which takes us to our last stop, which is autoimmune paleo. Autoimmune paleo avoids all the things that paleo avoids, but in addition to that, you'll also be avoiding things like nightshade vegetables, nuts and seeds, and also eggs. While this may seem restrictive to some, it can be a powerful approach that really helps people to hit the reset button and get things back on track. But if you want to learn more about autoimmune paleo, the guide that I often recommend at the end of videos, the 109 foods to boost your thyroid and improve your energy, it includes a list of autoimmune paleo style foods, and therefore it can give you a good jumping off point if that's something that you want to utilize. And of course, you can grab that at the link in the description box below. But in general, what I want you guys to know is we don't have to start with a whole foods diet or an autoimmune paleo style diet. What we want to do is we just want to choose the one that fits us best. And from there, any diet is going to require a certain amount of experimentation, and we need to listen to how our body responds. Limiting inflammatory foods can be very profound in helping certain people with their weight, but it doesn't help everyone. However, if you do make dietary changes and you see improvements in how you think, feel, and function, then that evidence is usually enough to suggest that you are on the right track. Just because you're not losing weight yet doesn't mean that you should abandon all the changes that you've made. So now that we have a better idea of how to choose the right foods for our body, let's move on to the second key to feeling and looking our best for life, which is choosing the right macros. Macronutrients include protein, fat, and carbohydrates. And depending on how much we're eating of each, it will lead to a different hormonal response that can either promote the burning of calories or the storage of calories. So even though you might be eating foods that you tolerate well, you could be eating foods that have a particular macronutrient distribution that isn't favorable for your body to burn body fat. Now, many times you'll hear people talk about macronutrient percentages, and I think this is junk. And I never talk to my patients about macronutrient percentages. Instead, I think we need to look at the macros in terms of grams and base it off of our body size and our goals. Our first macro priority is protein. And this is something that you guys have heard me talk about before, and I think most people are vastly underestimating their protein needs. Getting our protein right, and I don't really like to use this term, but it's almost like a hack. When we get adequate levels of protein, people's satiety goes through the roof, they feel much more stable, and that whole thinking about food all the time really isn't much of a problem. Additionally, and this is the main focus of this video of course, protein helps us to lose weight. It does it by encouraging a proper hormonal response to food, and it also can increase our lean muscle mass, which helps to burn calories long term. My typical recommendation is to take your weight in kilograms, so that means taking your weight in pounds and dividing by 2.2, and multiplying by 1.5. This will give you a baseline goal of how much protein you want to consume in a day to make sure you're hitting your protein minimums. However, if that seems a little too complex, here's my recommendation. Get a minimum of 100 grams of protein per day, and once you do that, adjust from there. If you're not there yet, get there. If you don't know what it looks like, track it. Getting our protein intake appropriate for what our body needs is hugely impactful on our metabolism and how we feel. So many people are under eating protein, and if we can make that change, especially if you're not where you want to be, it should result in very positive outcomes. Next on our list of macros is our two levers, carbohydrates and fats. These tend to be most utilized for energy, and if we have an excess amount, then we tend to store them. What you need to do is determine which one you run best on. And while people can have success with either one, in general, I tend to push people towards utilizing fat rather than carbohydrates because if we're already struggling with our weight, the standard American diet tends to be high in carbohydrates, and so I think it's reasonable to try to change things up and look at different options. In general, for adults, I think that 80 to 100 grams of healthy fats per day is reasonable. But some people will find that they do much better when they increase those fat levels, and others will do better if they reduce them. So once you have your protein set, you can play around and see if you do better with a higher amount of fat to protein or a higher amount of protein to fat. Both can lead to success for different kinds of people. In regards to carbohydrates, as I said before, I think a lower amount of carbohydrates when compared to the standard American diet is usually a good idea. Depending on how low we need to go is sort of similar to what we discussed with our dietary choices. The more sick we are, the more challenging our weight issues have been, typically the more restrictive we need to be with carbohydrates. That doesn't mean that carbohydrates are evil, but if we're not where we want to be, then we need to look at changing it. And as a general rule, people who are more active and less stressed can tolerate more carbohydrates. And therefore the inverse is true, which is the more stressed we are and the less active we are, then the less carbohydrates we typically tolerate. A good place to start is less than 100 net grams of carbohydrates per day, but if we need to be more restrictive, the next step would be less than 50 net grams of carbohydrates, and finally less than 20 net grams of carbohydrates. And as a reminder, net carbohydrates is the total amount of carbohydrates that you're consuming with the fiber subtracted out. Of course, just like with the protein, if you don't know what 100 grams of net carbohydrates look like, then you need to track. I don't think people need to track forever, but many times we don't have a lot of education or understanding about what our food actually represents. And until we learn more about that, I think tracking can be a very helpful and useful tool. But before we move on to our third key, hopefully this is all making sense. If you have any questions, leave me a comment below. And if you found certain dietary choices or macro distributions that have really worked for you, I would love it if you could share them with me. So finally, our last key is choose the right time to eat. Now, of course, fasting and intermittent fasting have become very popular as of late. And while I don't think everyone needs to be fasting, it's likely that most of us are eating too frequently. When we take a break from eating, it allows our insulin or storage hormones to drop, and it also allows the body to repair and heal our digestive tract. We shouldn't be digesting food all the time, and some people, due to their job, lifestyle, or food habits, are. In general, I think that we should all have 12 hours per day where we're not eating. If you want to do more than that, great. But so many of us are eating early, eating late, and I think that this really has some detrimental effects for our metabolism. In terms of eating within that 12-hour window, I do think it's more preferable for weight loss to eat 2 or 3 times per day rather than 5 or 6. However, some people who are really stressed have a difficult time going too long without food, and they may need to eat more frequently in those early stages. Just keep in mind that this can put a pause on your weight loss, but I think it's okay if we understand what our goals are and we're working to stabilize those energy levels first. If you are someone who struggles when you go 3 to 4 hours without eating, I do think it is super important that you have breakfast, even if you don't feel like eating or if you feel a little bit nauseous when you wake up in the morning. If you can get a breakfast that includes a good protein and fat, it will help to set you up for a much more stable and efficient day. But the main take-home points are this. Try to not eat too frequently throughout the day, and when you do eat, really focus on the nutrient quality of that meal. Make sure you have 12 hours every day where you're not eating to give your gut time to recuperate and heal. And if you feel better doing longer fasts, then that's great to incorporate it in your daily strategy. But you don't need to be doing 1, 2, or 3 day fasts to be able to achieve weight loss. So there you have it. Those are the 3 keys, which are choosing the right diet, choosing the right macros, and choosing the right time to eat. But I want you guys to remember, weight loss doesn't come from one magical food or some magical macronutrient ratio. Instead, weight loss comes from trial and error, figuring out what treats your body the best, and then doing that on a consistent basis. If you want to learn more about supporting your thyroid and helping with weight loss, as I said before, you can grab my link in the description box below, or you can send me an email at contact@seattlethyroidhelp.com, and I can get you all the information you need to set up a free one-on-one consultation with me to see if we would be a good fit to work together. As always, I know this can be a complicated topic, so if you have any questions, leave them for me in the comments box below or reach out on social media or through email. My name is Dr. Brad Bodle. I hope you guys are having an outstanding, absolutely wonderful day. If you haven't done so already, don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel. I hope you're looking forward to the new year and taking your health to the next level. All right, guys, I'll see you next week.